Just to be clear, I never badmouthed Iran. I badmouthed the Iranian regime, which I think is one of the most malevolent regimes in the world. That's not bad-mouthing the country of Iran.
Footage is from Qasem Soleimani's funeral in 2020. That is not footage from today. That is 100% propaganda. The Islamic regime, they are liars, they are murderers, they are thieves. I don't even know how he has access to the internet right now. The internet is...
The internet back on. Let everybody work out for themselves what is really happening. But when a regime shuts off the internet, what it's really doing is not trying to stop communication between protesters. It's trying to stop the truth about what it is doing in response being communicated to the world. And what you know how many people you believe have been killed on the regime side, but you have no idea how many people the regime's killed.
You don't want me to talk because you're afraid. Because you're afraid that I'm going to wreck your narrative. That's
a crap, aren't you? Because you said this last time. Do you remember? It was all going to happen last time.
Last time, Steve Bannon, the day after the war ended, on his show, said that...
Okay, so Piers Morgan just had Professor Marandi from Tehran University on his show. And guys, I'm not even kidding. This might be one of the most brutal interviews I've ever seen. And not in the way Piers thinks. Because what you're about to watch is Piers Morgan getting absolutely dismantled by someone who refused to play his game. Like, Piers walked into this thinking he was going to do his usual thing. Interrupt, throw accusations, play the moral high ground card. And instead, he got dragged so hard that by the end of this, he's literally yelling about bluffs and bluster because he has nothing left. And here's what makes this so wild. Marandi catches Piers in lie after lie, calls out his hypocrisy on Gaza, exposes how Western media manufactures consent for regime change wars, and Piers just keeps digging. It's genuinely embarrassing to watch. So buckle up, because this is what happens when corporate media talking points meet someone who actually knows how propaganda works. Let's get into it.
Welcome back to Uncensored, Mohammed Marandi. I appreciate you coming on. What is your assessment of what is happening on the ground in Iran?
Well, first of all, when you say a supporter of the regime, you're framing it in a certain way. I assume you are a supporter of the British or the American regime. But it's obvious what happened. We had currency manipulation last week. The currency fell 30–40%. It was carried out by the United States, forcing neighboring countries not to cooperate with the Iranians over the currency. Then we had peaceful protests among business people. And there were a few thousand people in 2-3 different cities. There was no violence. There were no arrests. Nothing happened. Then the next day, we had more protests, roughly the same size, I guess. I don't remember exactly. Then we had infiltration, and we had violent rioters. And that was the beginning of extreme violence, which peaked on Thursday night. And we know that Pompeo, the former head of the CIA, said that Mossad is on the ground with the rioters. We have Mossad in a Persian statement. They said that they are on the ground. And the most interesting thing of all is that late on Thursday night, during the height of the riots, and roughly 100 officers of the law were murdered. A couple of them burnt alive, beheaded, head smashed. We had a nurse who was burned alive in a clinic. The clinic was burnt down. We had many buses, ambulances, and fire engines destroyed, tens of each. I'm not sure about ambulances, but I know tens of fire engines and public buses and private property. But the point is that late on Thursday night or early in the morning, they cut off the internet and suddenly everything died down. The reason? Because all these groups, these small groups, violent groups that were spread out in different cities and different parts of big cities, they could no longer communicate with their bosses abroad. So if it was really spontaneous, the riots would have continued. But now we've had 4 days of quiet. And yesterday, we had massive anti-riot protests across the country, and I asked your producer to show footage of the protests in Tehran against the rioters. And this is from the middle of the footage. This is Engelab Square. It goes from Imam Hussein Square to Azadi Square, from Engelab Square south to Imam Khomeini Square. That is millions of people. That is huge. Anyone can look on the map or use DeepSeek or some other AI app and check what sort of distance this is. This is a helicopter. But just a few hours ago...
Just to stop you there, Professor O'May, just to be clear, that's footage you've supplied. We've been unable to independently verify it, so it is what it is. Clearly, there are people, it seems from all the independent reports I've read, who are... Okay, so Goldie, for example, one of our panelists, is saying that footage is from 2020. So we don't know what you're showing us there. You accept that?
No, that's a dishonest take. That footage is very clear. This misinformation is being produced by the West, and the reporter who was on that helicopter, whose face is there, he came on television, showed the footage. I was at the protest. There were millions of people. What you are trying to do, just like you did during the Israeli regime's attack on Iran, is you are trying to help war. Because when the Israeli regime carried out that blitzkrieg attack, as we were negotiating with them, you invited me and started bad-mouthing Iran. Why? Because you and many others like you...
No, I didn't bad-mouth Iran. Sorry, just to be clear.
Oh, yes, you did.
Just to be clear. Hang on. Professor, just to be clear, I never bad-mouthed Iran. I bad-mouthed the Iranian regime, which I think is one of the most malevolent regimes in the world. That's not bad-mouthing the country of Iran or the Iranian people. Now, I want to bring in Goldie Gamari because she wants to directly challenge...
Okay, hold on. Stop right there. Do you see what just happened? Piers Morgan, a man who built his entire career on interrupting people and controlling the narrative, just got completely boxed in by his own setup. Let me break this down for you, because this is media manipulation 101, and Marandi just exposed it in real time. Piers brings on a panelist, Goldie, who immediately claims the protest footage is from 2020, from Soleimani's funeral. That's the hook, right? That's supposed to be the gotcha moment. See, the regime is lying. We caught you. But then Marandi does something beautiful. He doesn't just deny it, he actually explains why that's impossible. He breaks down the geography, points out there are no funeral trucks in the footage, explains the procession route was completely different. Like he came prepared with actual details that you can verify. And Piers has nothing. So what does he do? He pivots. Well, the best way to clear this up is to turn the internet back on. And this is where it gets really interesting, because Marandi already explained why the internet got shut off. Because small groups of violent rioters spread across different cities could no longer coordinate with handlers abroad once connectivity was cut. That's not censorship of protesters, that's disrupting a coordinated operation. Whether you believe that or not, it's a completely different framing than they just don't want the truth getting out. But Piers needs the Western narrative to be true. He needs Iran to be this evil regime murdering peaceful protesters. Because otherwise, what's the justification for regime change? What's the justification for supporting Trump or Israel going after Iran? And notice how Piers keeps saying thousands killed. He throws out numbers like 12,000. But when Marandi asks him for a source, Piers can't provide one. Because the Iranian government hasn't released official casualty figures. So where's Piers getting these numbers? He's just repeating Western intelligence claims. The same intelligence agencies that lied about Iraqi WMDs. The same ones that manufacture consent for every regime change war. And Marandi calls him on it directly. You're just like those journalists who talked about weapons of mass destruction. And Piers gets so defensive. Well, I led the campaign against that. Which, okay, sure, you did on Iraq. Credit where it's due. But then why are you doing the exact same thing now with Iran? Why are you uncritically amplifying unverified claims about mass casualties to build support for military intervention? That's the hypocrisy Marandi's exposing. Piers learned nothing from Iraq. He's just better at picking which wars to support now. Here's the thing about Piers Morgan that drives me insane. He positions himself as this tough, no-nonsense interviewer who just asks the hard questions. But the second someone actually challenges his framing, he falls apart. He interrupts more. He gets louder. He throws out accusations. Because the hard questions only go one way. When Marandi flips it and asks, why were you demonizing Iran while they were negotiating a ceasefire with Israel? Piers has no answer. When Marandi brings up Piers' support for Israel's genocide in Gaza, Piers just moves on. He doesn't engage. Because those questions make him look bad. And I want you to notice something. Marandi keeps bringing it back to the bigger picture. He's not just defending the Iranian government. He's pointing out the pattern. You did this during the Israeli blitzkrieg attack. You're doing it now for Trump. You're preparing the ground for war. That's the through line. This isn't about one interview. This is about how Western media consistently manufactures consent for regime change operations. And Piers is a tool, willingly or not, in that machine. Let me know in the comments. Do you think Piers actually believes what he's saying here? Or does he just know which narratives keep him employed at Rupert Murdoch Properties? Because I genuinely can't tell anymore.
I'm going to bring in Goldie Gamari because she wants to directly challenge.
You said
she wants to directly challenge what you have said.
One-on-one.
Yes,
you said
that's
it's
fine.
a one-on-one.
That's fine.
Your producer,
but you've accused her.
You did not allow me to continue.
Fine, but you have.
Your producer said.
Yes.
It's a one-on-one between you and me.
Yes.
You're escaping the debate.
Hang on, Goldie. Hang on, Goldie. Hang on, please. Don't all talk at once. Professor Marandi. Professor Marandi.
You and me.
Professor Marandi, let me, Goldie, please let me handle this. Professor Marandi, here's why I brought Goldie back into the conversation with you.
No, so you're being dishonest.
Because she says to us, have you watched that footage? It is actually not what you have said it is. Goldie, tell the professor what you believe that footage is.
That footage is from Qasem Soleimani's funeral in 2020. That is not footage from today. That is 100% propaganda. The Islamic regime, they are liars. They are murderers. They are thieves. I don't even know how he has access to the internet right now. The internet is shut off. The internet is shut off. Where is he communicating from?
Okay, now, Piers, I just want to remind you that your producer said this is a one-on-one.
Yeah.
And like on previous occasions, you do not abide by what you say you'll do.
Well, you made a statement. You made a statement and gave us footage, which one of our panelists has directly challenged.
But just to respond, in the General Qasem Soleimani's funeral, the bodies were on trucks, and there are no trucks in this crowd. And the crowd goes from Imam Hussein Square, which is to the top, towards the top. The crowd here goes all the way to Imam Hussein Square. The bodies never went there. The bodies began, the funeral procession began at the University of Tehran. So the path of the General Soleimani funeral and his companions was not towards Imam Hussein. And here, where are the trucks? Where is the funeral procession? Because it was not just him. There were a number of people who were murdered. Don't pretend. No one can pretend that the rallies yesterday, which took place across Iran, in Mashhad, in Tabriz, in Maran, in Esfahan.
The footage rally, all been debunked.
This Piers, if you next, I won't come again on your show because every time you're dishonest.
You won't be able to come again on the show because when Iran is free, we're going to get you're going to go to jail.
No. To be fair, let me explain. Goldie, let me explain.
People on your hands right now.
Goldie, I will come back to Goldie and the panel in a moment. I'll go back to one-on-one. I will go back to one, Professor. I will go back to one-on-one with you now. She wanted to directly challenge that footage. She's done so, and you have responded. That is perfectly legitimate journalism from where I'm sitting.
No, that's not acceptable, Piers. In any case, just hours ago, the BBC was showing the footage of the protests across Iran against the rioters yesterday and talking about an uprising, implying dishonestly that these people on the streets who are protesting against the rioters are in fact supporters of the rioters. This is how it works in the West.
Well, the best way, surely. All right, Professor, the best way, Professor, the best way to
talk about.
Professor,
just one moment.
The best way to clear this up is to allow journalists to do their job freely in Iran, turn the internet back on, let everybody work out for themselves what is really happening. But when a regime shuts off the internet, what it's really doing is not trying to stop communication between protesters, it's trying to stop the truth about what it is doing in response being communicated to the world. And what it's doing is murdering thousands of Iranians who are protesting. They've admitted killing 2,000. Reports are that it may be as many as 12,000 or more. We're seeing footage here of body bags everywhere. And that is why the regime is turning off the internet. It's not out of some great altruistic, well, we just, don't want these people communicating. It's so that we can kill them and the rest of the world can't see what we're doing.
No, Piers, that is an utterly dishonest take. The numbers are fabricated. The government has not given any numbers. And as I said
2,000.
I'm talking, Piers. You don't want me to talk.
Well, you said you're just wrong.
You are just like those journalists who are talking about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and the incubators. And
I led the campaign against that, as you may remember.
Well, you've flipped.
I haven't flipped to anything. I try and deal in facts.
No, Piers. We had rioters who burned people alive, who cut people's heads off, and it's the evidence.
And what has your regime done to the protesters?
The protesters, Piers, the millions of people that came to the streets yesterday. Why did they come to the streets? It's because your narrative is nonsense.
Oh, this is where Piers completely loses it. Like, watch his face right here. He thought he had a gotcha. He really did. What happened to your retaliation last time? You said it was going to be massive, and nothing happened. You're full of crap. And then Marandi just calmly explains that, according to Steve Bannon, Trump's own guy, Israel was begging for a ceasefire in the final days because Iran's response actually did serious damage. And Piers just yells louder. This is the moment where you can see Piers has no actual argument left. He's just throwing insults. You're full of crap. It's embarrassing. You're a puppet. Like, dude, you're supposed to be a professional journalist. But he can't help himself because Marandi just destroyed his entire framing. Piers wants Iran to be this weak, bluffing regime that talks big but can't back it up. That's the narrative. That's what justifies supporting Trump's maximum pressure campaign or Israel's strikes. But if Iran actually did respond effectively, if they actually did hit Tel Aviv hard enough that Israel wanted out, then the whole narrative collapses. And that's why Piers is so rattled. Because Marandi isn't just defending Iran's actions. He's citing Western sources, Steve Bannon, Israeli media admitting the damage. Piers can't dismiss that as regime propaganda. So instead, he just talks over him, calls him a liar, and ends the interview. But here's what really gets me about this whole exchange. Piers Morgan, the guy who spent a year and a half denying Israel was committing genocide in Gaza, is now lecturing Iran about human rights. Let that sink in. This man watched Israel slaughter 50,000 civilians, flatten entire neighborhoods, starve 2 million people, and his response was to defend it, minimize it, both sides it for months. But Iran shuts off the internet during riots where, by Marandi's account, 100 police officers were murdered, some burned alive, some beheaded. And suddenly, Piers is the champion of free expression and human rights. Do you see the hypocrisy? It's so blatant. Marandi calls it out directly. You denied the genocide in Gaza for a year and a half. And Piers doesn't even respond to that. He can't, because it's true. So he pivots to retaliation and bluster, and history will remember your lies. Yeah, Piers, history's going to remember someone's lies. And buddy, I don't think it's going to be Marandi. Look, I'm not here to carry water for the Iranian government. I think all governments should be held accountable. I think shutting off the internet is bad. I think any government killing protesters is bad, whether it's Iran or Israel or the US during the George Floyd uprisings when cops were shooting journalists with rubber bullets and arresting people for breaking curfew. But what I cannot stand is this selective outrage. Piers Morgan doesn't care about Iranian protesters. If he did, he'd also care about Palestinian protesters and Yemeni civilians and the people being bombed with American weapons all over the Middle East. But he doesn't. He cares about the protesters that make good propaganda for the wars his bosses want. And that's the grift. That's what Marandi is exposing. Piers isn't a journalist in this interview. He's a propagandist. He's amplifying unverified claims, dismissing contrary evidence, shutting down challenges to his narrative, and personally attacking someone who won't play along. That's not journalism. That's manufacturing consent. And the craziest part? Marandi stays calm the whole time. He's getting called a liar, a puppet, told he has blood on his hands, and he just keeps making his points. Meanwhile, Piers is red-faced, yelling, talking over him, ending the interview early because he can't handle getting checked. Who looks more credible here? Genuinely. I know Western audiences are conditioned to see anyone defending Iran as automatically wrong. But if you actually watch this with fresh eyes, one guy is citing sources and explaining context, and the other guy is just yelling. Drop a comment. How do you think this would have gone if Piers actually let Marandi finish his points instead of interrupting every 10 seconds? Because I think Piers knew he was losing, and that's why he kept cutting him off.
Your narrative.
How many protesters have been killed?
I don't know the numbers.
You don't know?
I do know that roughly 100 officers of the law have been murdered.
So you know how many people you believe have been killed on the regime side, but you have no idea how many people the regime's killed. Interesting.
You don't want me to talk because you're afraid. Because you're afraid that I'm going to wreck your narrative. That's cowardly, Piers.
I think what you're afraid of, you're afraid of this uprising this time being the one that actually topples the regime that you prop up.
You want to help, just like you were preparing as the Israeli regime carried out its blitzkrieg attack on Iran when Iran was negotiating. You were saying all sorts of nonsense about Iran to demonize the country, to justify the aggression and the slaughter. So you have blood on your hands. And this is what you're doing now today for Trump. The protesters on the streets across the country yesterday said a big no to you and your fake narratives. But people like you will just go out and say, this is fake. There was no demonstration. Whereas there were reporters in Iran. Al Jazeera was there. Many other people were there. You had Iranians across the board there. It was shown live on television, Piers. It was shown on Iranian channels live. Your producers can go back and look at the footage online as it was being shown. You cannot pretend that millions of people were not on the streets in Tehran. You cannot pretend that simultaneously millions of people were not on the streets throughout the country. It's a fact. It was shown live throughout.
I'm not sure, Professor, all due respect, I'm not sure that you and facts are easy bedfellows. But I appreciate
That's
you.
your problem, Piers.
Not really.
You're the one who
Actually, it may be a problem for
You're
you.
the one. You're the one who denied the genocide in Gaza for a year and a half, and you tried to justify the actions of the Israeli regime for a year and a half. And let me be very clear that if the United States, if Trump carries out an attack on Iran, the Iranian retaliation will be massive. And people like you,
it was after the strike last summer, you mean?
People like you.
You said this last time.
Like you
said this last time.
People like you will bear responsibility.
But this is the trouble. You're full of crap, aren't you? Because you said this last time. Do you remember? It was all going to happen last time.
Last time, Steve Bannon, the day after the war ended, on his show, said that the reality was that during the last 3-4 days of the war, the Israeli regime was in serious trouble, and they were begging for a ceasefire.
But what happened to the retaliation that you said would happen?
And Trump, because the Israeli regime was begging for a ceasefire. What
happened to your retaliation?
Did you see Tel Aviv? Did you see how we hammered Tel Aviv?
Please, it's embarrassing.
Sure.
It's embarrassing.
You
come on here all the time and you say it's going to be retaliation is going to be horrific. It's going to be this. It's going to be that, and it doesn't happen. Iran doesn't have the capability to respond in the way that you talk. It's all bluff. It's all bluster. And what it seems to me, Professor, now is the people of Iran have had enough of this bullshit and they're rising up. And as the German Chancellor says, I believe this is the beginning of the end of that regime, and puppets like you that have helped prop it up are going to look very stupid when that day comes. But I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much indeed for joining me.
Lies, Piers.
I'll go back to the panel.
Piers, history will remember your lies.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure they'll remember someone's lies, and it won't be me. But thank you.
Remember your lies.
Okay, so let's recap what we just watched. Piers Morgan invited Professor Marandi on, presumably to dunk on him about Iranian protests. And instead, Marandi systematically dismantled every single talking point Piers threw at him. He called out the footage misidentification, explained the internet shutdown in context, cited casualty figures Piers couldn't verify, exposed Piers' hypocrisy on Gaza, and tied the whole thing back to Western media's role in justifying regime change wars. And Piers' response? Yell louder, call him names, and end the interview before he could say anything else. That is not what winning looks like. That's what panic looks like. And the reason Piers is panicking is because Marandi's right about one thing. This is exactly how the media prepared the ground for Iraq, for Libya, for Syria. Amplify unverified claims, demonize the target, dismiss contrary evidence, repeat until the public supports military intervention. And it works. It worked in Iraq. It worked in Libya. It's working right now with Iran. Now, does that mean I think the Iranian government is perfect? No. Does it mean I think there are no legitimate grievances among protesters? Of course not. But what I do know is that when Western media and Western governments suddenly care deeply about the suffering of people in a country they've been sanctioning and bombing for decades, you should ask yourself, who benefits from regime change in Iran? Is it the Iranian people? Or is it the same oil companies, defense contractors, and geopolitical strategists who benefited from regime change in Iraq? Because here's the thing. If Trump goes to war with Iran, working-class Americans will pay for it. Iranian civilians will pay for it. The only people who win are Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, ExxonMobil, and the politicians they fund. And people like Piers Morgan? They'll cheer it on, just like they did with Iraq, until it becomes politically inconvenient, and then they'll pretend they were always against it. So yeah, Marandi won this. Not because I agree with everything he said, but because he actually had receipts. He had context. He had sources. And Piers? Piers had vibes and volume. And when vibes meet facts, facts win. If you want to see more breakdowns like this, where we actually go past the surface level propaganda and follow the money, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to MB because that's what we do here. We don't just react. We analyze. We question. We follow the money. And we call out the grift no matter which side it's coming from. Stay sharp. I'll see you in the next one.